In 1997, Paul Anderson released the epic masterpiece of science fiction horror, Event Horizon, intersecting beautiful artistic elements of grandiose architecture and design in the vein of Hellraiser. Event Horizon explored not only sentient haunted house and space elements, but delved directly into the most horrific forms of horror, hell, and the eternal damnation there within. In modern cinema, a direct representation of the true, purific, eternal dark fires that inhabit hell are rarely glimpsed. When done right, this form of horror is quite frankly the most terrifying possible. What is more horrific than the idea of eternal torture? Countless movies have tapped into this horrific design, but few have made us feel as if we are truly glimpsing that dark world, or fear for the characters, or even ourselves succumbing to a similar fate. Hellraiser is perhaps the most notable film in the genre to accurately and masterfully depict such a concept, and Hellraiser must be addressed, as it will often be referenced throughout this work, as this movie may or may not have existed without its influence, and arguably, if it did make its way into existence without Hellraiser, it would likely be presented in an altogether different fashion. It is easily argued that other works, namely Dante's Inferno and the Bible, delved into this territory long before Clive Barker's Hellraiser. Whilst cavemen and the tribes of the earth before recorded history told tales of the horror-filled afterlife, and slowly developed it into modern religion. But for Hollywood, for a truly epic and dark depiction of hell, we have at the forefront the grandfather, Hellraiser. Hellraiser goes all out in its intricate design and elements of artistry, fully in capturing all of the elements needed to masterfully depict the true fear of eternal damnation. Even in the mid-entries in the series, when the overall quality of the films was rapidly deteriorating, the architectural design of the buildings and spaceships that the originally masterful Box and Leviathan had created and influenced were still stunning and grandiose. In the schlock realm, there have been many attempts, and I assume there are many I have missed out on, to recreate this deep, dark fear. Olaf Ittenbach's The Burning Moon, whilst being terribly cheap and devoid of plot, is a perfect example. It manages to, in many ways, effectively pull off a brutally gory, gross-out fear factor by going completely overboard in the ending scene, with an extended hell torture scene. Return of the Living Dead effectively and horrifically pulls this concept off when it reveals the zombies feel themselves rotting and falling to pieces. Whilst on the other end of the spectrum, the Black Mirror's episode, the USS Callister, would be the perfect example of very effectively utilizing psychology to capture that essence of eternal damnation fear, while being terribly cheesy and full of campy ridiculousness. And whilst being completely devoid of gore, Black Mirror expertly pulled off the idea and showcases how the imagination is the true master of this genre. It is not about pure gore, but capturing the imagination's will to fill in the details and force the imaginer to fear that such a fate may befall themselves, and that once begun, it will never, ever stop. The Burning Moon style is fun for a gross out and can be utterly effective, but I feel the imagination element, the mind element that Black Mirror captures is the more effective of the two. Event Horizon, however, like Hellraiser before it, manages to draw from both styles, effectively perfecting the use of hell itself within a script, producing a very brutally yet tastefully done film that is both effective on the psychological and thinking level, as well as in the realm of brutal, gross-out gore. A brief synopsis is needed before we delve too deeply into my favorite aspects. In 2047, the rescue vessel the Lewis and Clark, led by Lawrence Fishburne as Captain Miller, is tasked with finding and returning the legendary Event Horizon and her crew. The ship mysteriously appears near Neptune and sends a distress signal after having been lost for 7 years during the mysterious first jump to Proxima Centauri. The crew, consisting of Captain Miller, Lieutenant Stark, Pilot Smith, Medical Technician Peters, Engineer Ensign Justin, Dr. DJ, and Rescue Technician Cooper, is accompanied by Dr. William Weir, the creator of the Event Horizon, a massive starship containing a gravity drive which, when activated, tears a hole through space-time by creating a black hole. In theory, the ship then travels through the black hole to its destination. In practice, the gateway leads directly to hell. When the crew finds the Event Horizon and boards her, evidence of a massive and violent massacre is apparent, while the ship, seemingly reacting to the crew, initiates the gravity drive. Justin is pulled through the gateway, while a massive shockwave renders the Lewis and Clark incapable of supporting life or of escape. The crew is forced to piece together the mystery of the Event Horizon, with only 20 hours of air on board the haunted vessel, while trying to fix the Lewis and Clark and escape. All the while, the tension and stakes are continually raised, as with each solved mystery, a new level of weight and horror is added to the game, while the ship seemingly gains more and more power, influence, and dominance over everyone and everything. Eventually, the darkest mystery is revealed, and the stakes are raised to their maximum. Its sinister intention is to suck the entire crew into hell for a life of eternal pain and agony, where your mind is not your own, you do not need eyes to see, and you will never be alone again. I remember it quite fondly. In 1997, while I was supposed to be delivering pizza, I snuck away from work, having various vouched for and self-identified as cool employees agree to pretend that there was no delivery this evening. Hiding such information from the boss, I escaped to the cinema, where I was promptly mesmerized and terrorized by the brutally epic Event Horizon. I was probably 17 at the time, so truly scaring me was still very possible, but quite a work. Whereas at 10, this movie would have ravaged my mind beyond return. At 17, it was simply one of the best, if not the best horror movie I had ever seen. I returned the very next night to repeat the process, and was truly amazed by the film. Where Event Horizon fails, it fails lightly. Where Event Horizon succeeds, it masterfully succeeds in such an epic fashion that after countless Hollywood big-budget horror romps, such as the entire Resident Evil series, this is still Paul Anderson's most beloved work, especially in the cult world, where Event Horizon holds a crown over the genre, and it is a well-deserved crown. I return to this film every 3 to 4 years since I first saw it in the theater more than 2 decades ago, and although my views and understandings of things have slightly changed, the film never lets me down. A nearly perfect execution combined with real-life conspiracy theories and scientific studies and experiments add weight to the ideas and plot, making Event Horizon bleed out into what we understand as reality, all of which cements Event Horizon's ultimate impact and status as a masterpiece of horror and genre history. Before we get started, consider hitting that like and subscribe for me. It really does help me out. I have new narrations and reviews coming out all the time, so if you've made it this far, it'll be worth your time. If you cannot tell, I love this movie, and because of that, perhaps my opinion should be taken with a little less weight. However, please decide this after watching the whole video and understanding my arguments for why this film is one of the best horror movies of the 90s, is beyond one of the best films within its genre, and why, when considering modern scientific experiments and conspiracy theory, as well as a new show in development by Amazon, it is more relevant today than it has ever been. Without any further ado, here's my top 10 aspects of Event Horizon. At 10, we have the Hell Ride. When Captain Miller blows the hallway up in an attempt to separate the bridge from the main section of the Event Horizon and escape hell, it produces a breathtaking shockwave effect as the gateway is opened, the ship is pulled into hell, and the bridge, used as a life pod, seemingly escapes the horrendous tortures of the eternal pit. The atmosphere, pacing, and effects all merge together for a very well-produced and fun-to-watch scene. At 9, we have Justin's Spacewalk. Justin, played by Jack Noseworthy of Hocus Pocus and the lead in the obscure MTV conspiracy-based Dead at 21 fame, is the first to see whatever lies beyond the gravity drive, when he is sucked into the machine and seemingly transported to hell. On return, he is trapped in a coma, and when he awakens, his mind is either ravaged by insanity, or he is most likely completely possessed by the ship. The ship is also acting oddly, and unseen noises and strange occurrences are happening. All of this seems to culminate with Justin initiating a spacewalk without a suit. Once the sequence is initiated and Justin's destination set in stone, his mind is seemingly returned to him so he can experience his upcoming trauma completely. It is a very brutal scene, and whilst I don't know the exact science of what really happens to you when you enter space with no protection, in media it seems to vary. Explosion, fast to instant freezing. In Event Horizon, it appears the cold is not so much an issue as the pressure. Justin is literally being torn apart from the inside out. His veins bulge and grow dark. His eyes and mouth openly bleed. It is one of the more brutal and shocking depictions of a human exposed to space. Captain Miller launches himself into Justin and brings him back to the Event Horizon, where they are able to sedate and treat him medically. But he is out of commission for the rest of the film and is likely going to be a PTSD-riddled mess of a human if he makes it home. Well scened, shocking, scary, and timed very well. We give Justin just enough damage and screen time and space to truly scare us, and not killing him drives the shock home much harder. If he had died, I think we would feel less for him than we do. The scene is most likely one of the most popular and most referenced scenes in the film, and is still very powerful today. At number 8, we have the idea of swimming with sharks. Throughout the entirety of the film, there is a sense of a dreadful, incoming, unseen dark horror. Early on in the movie, the Lewis and Clark is damaged heavily and the crew is forced to inhabit the Event Horizon for its life support capabilities. The initial problem? There is only 20 hours of air. The ship appears to be alive and toying with their brains, and Dr. Weir is continually devolving into madness. All of these aspects form a clock that continually ticks down, creating the sense that the crew is swimming in shark-infested waters, which increase in danger with every moment. Near the finale of the film, Dr. Weir initiates the gravity drive, intending to take everyone and everything back through the portal, to hell. This increases the stakes 100-fold, as death is no longer the end. Eternal damnation and brutal torture has replaced the game. Death would be a way out at this point. The inclusion of eternal torture, and how well it is done, places a great element of escape and panic to the game, as the characters, all too aware of their situation, desperately toil ever more frantically to find an escape. Coming in at 7, we have the Event Horizon transmission scene decoded. The Event Horizon transmission scene is perhaps the most famous scene of the movie. It was for me the moment when I was first truly scared. Not happy and frightful and enjoying the masterful atmosphere, but truly worried and terrified for the outcome of the characters. The Event Horizon made its way to Neptune, where it was to wormhole its way via the gravity drive to Alpha Centauri. Once initiated, the Event Horizon disappeared and the crew's log was rendered unviewable. After the crew run it through a range of what I assume is ultra-high-tech film repair equipment, we are presented with a documented scene of the abyss. The crew is transported straight to the pit, where they initiate a brutally violent and horrific scene of sex, body dismemberment, and pure insanity. In one of the greatest lines in the movie, the old captain emits, "LIBERATE TUTEMET EX INFERIS." Save yourself from hell. We are shown this through the eyes of the current crew, and the scene is done so well that the fear of the crew burns through the camera. The characters are developed well enough, and played well enough that you can actually feel something for them, and feel a sense of dread and ownership as they attempt to avoid this nightmarish outcome. Apparently there was much more of this filmed. In a story that reads like an internet ARG begging for inspection, nearly 30 minutes of footage was lost. Apparently it was found unusable in a salt mine somewhere. However, much of this footage is apparently porn stars and crazed actors staging the brutal sex death orgy. I feel like we saw just as much as we needed of set footage to get the idea, but purists want the unshown scenes, which are, according to lore, much more brutal and extend for a much longer period of time. Also lost was apparently a great deal of character development, explaining DJ's worst fears being surgically butchered alive after a childhood surgery. This would have certainly made it more effective when he is surgically brutalized to death. More is given on Peter's relationship with her son, and perhaps that would help the, in my opinion, weaker scenes of her chasing her son, before her death at the hands of the Event Horizon's gravity drive mind control. Either way, we will never know, and although I love this cut of the film, I would also love to see what Paul Anderson originally intended, and if the film would or would not benefit from the inclusion of the lost scenes. At the least, I would love to have the character development added, and feel it may greatly enhance the film. At number 6, we have Lawrence Fishburne. Lawrence Fishburne plays Captain Miller. He is very effective and believable in the role. Overly strong, direct, and confident, he gives off the impression he truly cares for the well-being of his crew. He also plays his fear quite well. His eyes and facial expressions are great. This is just before he achieved breakthrough status as Morpheus in The Matrix. He was a great choice, considering the film has a lot of action elements and Lawrence Fishburne knows the action game. He has come a long way at this point, having once been Pee Wee Herman's cowboy. In the years that follow, he would rise to a much higher degree of fame. At number 5, we have the plot. The plot is, of course in my opinion, completely amazing. Whenever a piece of art effectively takes on and conveys the horrific ideals of eternal damnation, it excels well beyond any other idea of horror. What is scarier than eternal damnation? Event Horizon effectively takes these ideas that most art and media cannot seem to grasp correctly, plunges them deep into the scientific future and most notably into the chaotic and dangerous environment of space. This is, in my opinion, the only film to bring this reality into space. Diehards may argue, and rightly so, that Hellraiser Bloodline took these ideas into space 1 year earlier, and they are correct. And while Hellraiser Bloodline is effective in its gore, it is not as effective or as creative as Event Horizon. Not to dwell on Hellraiser, but even in its failings, Hellraiser often gave us some of the most beautiful designs and set pieces, architecturally Escher-esque, unique and disturbing. Event Horizon is greatly influenced by Hellraiser, to the point that Dr. Weir becomes a Cenobite-esque hell priest near the end of the film, and in the same way that Hellraiser fails in the later films, making Pinhead into a slasher villain creature. Event Horizon also starts to teeter on this bridge in its later treatments of Dr. Weir. This would be one of my few complaints or criticisms against this film. The Event Horizon has torn a gateway to hell and dwelled there for 7 years. It is now mysteriously returned. A rescue crew is sent to investigate. They are met with a living ship that intends to take them to hell. On the surface, it seems a bit too over the top, silly and perhaps a bit too ambitious in its overall intent and design. Yet in execution, the silliness is removed from the equation, and the ambition is injected with a heavy dose of talented acting, set design, imagery, and grand direction, creating a masterpiece of the genre, and the masterpiece is only made possible by the plot. At number 4, we have the great Sam Neill. It is hard not to put him at number 1, simply because his acting chops are amazing. He delivers every line with a talent for perfection. When he is Weir, believable, scared, lonely, seeking his lost wife. When he is the Hell Priest creature, he is insane, dominating, horrific, and purely evil, and he pulls all of that off perfectly. The problem may well be that the Hell Priest is too cheesy in creation. Perhaps if we had the lost footage that supposedly showed much more of his scenes, we would have a different take. But what we have does become a Hellraiser-esque Cenobite cliché. After tearing out his own eyes and being blasted into space, he is returned whole, with a new look and a returned set of eyes, which initially seems very silly, but is a horrific concept if you think it through. After being completely torn apart and killed, the ship reassembled and reanimated him, which is even scarier when the eternal torture ideals are considered. Despite the horrific nature of the character, it feels as if he is somewhat thrown in and all too much Hellraiser-ish. It would be one of the few complaints with the film, that he is a bit too over the top and silly, and perhaps this entire turn was unneeded. With all that said, Sam Neill does gold with what he is given and drives the insanity of Dr. Weir home in a very enjoyable take on the role, one that is played far better than 90% of the other lead villains in the genre. If the performance is flawed, and in my opinion it is the fault of the script devolving slightly into action and silliness, not a fault of Neill, who pulls off the over-the-top nature perfectly. At number 3, we have the ideas of the gravity drive. The concept and mythology behind the gravity drive is one of the best features of the movie. The gravity drive itself is a grandiose piece of ever-moving architecture in the vein, again, of the Hellraiser box and Grand Labyrinth designs of the earlier films. It spirals and contorts, evolving and rendering various shapes against itself, while always teasing at its horrific purpose, to open a passageway to hell. At times it resembles Saturn, with a nod to the occult. The gravity drive is a unique concept, and introducing a black hole as a gateway to this dark land of chaos adds a masterful touch to the overall design of the film. The drive itself takes influence from many different mechanizations depicted in cinema, all used to travel through dimensions or to relegate great distances, such as the Stargate. There's likely far too many to list here, and doing so would result in a video all its own. A YouTube search on Saturn, the occult, and Stargates would likely send you down a vast rabbit hole of conspiracy lore that again would add weight to the ideas in Event Horizon. In recent cinema, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse had a CERN-esque device that was being used to combine different realities. Which brings us to CERN. I would argue CERN is the true inspiration for the gravity drive. If the gravity drive did not predate CERN by decades, the modern era of the internet has created an abundance of conspiracy theories, with a great deal of accompanying data. The CERN Hadron Collider must specifically be mentioned, as much of its existence has been riddled with conspiracy. To us laymen's, apparently they're speeding atoms up and smashing them together at ridiculous speed to do something. If we are to believe the countless films that depicted this long before it existed, they are trying to open a gateway to somewhere. The Tower of Babel itself from the Bible has been argued as a gateway in occultish and Bible-deciphering groups, and when viewed from above, would resemble CERN. Perhaps this is the true influence for the gravity drive in CERN itself. The modern conspiracy theory known as the Mandela effect has often been cited as caused by the CERN Hadron Collider. The theory, in essence, although this does not cover the wide differences in alternating theories people have developed, is that CERN scientists, for unknown reasons, in some theories reasons such as preventing the destruction of mankind in 2012 are presented. Nevertheless, using CERN, somehow scientists are able to travel back in time or otherwise change the timeline. A direct consequence is the altering of history. Whilst many individuals remember the old timeline, and they are not just a few crackpots but a legion of confused and bewildered people, regardless of the reality of the situation, which is impossible to extrapolate. Examples all revolve around people remembering history differently than it actually occurred, such as Nelson Mandela dying in the 80s, the Berenstein or Berenstain-Bears spelling changing, Luke, I am your father from Star Wars being misquoted, the JFK car having 6 seats instead of 4, and Dolly from Bond having braces are all very well documented, and I recommend you diving into the Mandela effect rabbit hole if you have not. At the least, it is a highly entertaining theory. At the most, your brain will explode. A speech of Sally Fields has been accused of changing. Well, Sally Fields' brother works at CERN, and this strange picture from CERN has made its way to the internet. I am not here to delve deeply into the Mandela effect, just to say that something is happening at CERN, something that we, as laymen, cannot fully comprehend. These conspiracies are fairly new in the conspiracy world when viewed alongside other long-standing ideas. While the gravity drive predates CERN by decades, their similarities are beyond comparison. While tons of other movies have used similar mechanizations to traverse to other far-off places, at the least, it very much enhances the atmosphere and believability of the movie. At the very most, it hints at scientists opening a gateway to hell and shipping everyone along for the ride, where we will remain for all eternity in the deep, dark pit. A concept that pushes the ideals of the movie into reality, putting the viewers in the direct path of hell with no means or way to avoid it. These conspiracy theories are relevant, and as far as conspiracy theory history goes, fairly new to the game. It could even be argued that CERN was possibly influenced by Event Horizon, although that would likely fall on its face as so many other movies predate CERN and use a Stargate apparatus. I do believe these ideas are influenced by similar occult writings, in specific the idea of the Stargate, but that would be an idea for an entirely different video. At the least, all of this insanity is based on actual ongoing scientific studies and adds a great deal of weight to the ultimate effect and continued relevance of Event Horizon. At number 2, we have the imagery. The imagery is truly amazing. From the short and brutal flashes of hell, the dark shots of space and Neptune, the ship itself and its long dark hallway which resembles an eye, the atmosphere, the overwhelming sense of looming eternal damnation is captured perfectly within the ever-rotating and spiraling clock of symmetry which is the gravity drive and the ship itself. Everything visually in this movie is done with a sense of grandiose attention to detail. The design of the ship is beyond epic, creating an ultimate castle in space that is not only haunted, the ship is alive, and the ship is always watching you. And in some cases it appears to even have its own eye. And whilst it watches you, it is a marvel of architecture and beauty to gaze back at, regardless of its sadistic intentions and the fact that hell itself may be gazing back at you. Before we get to number 1, we should talk about some honorable mentions. The first honorable mention, we have the soundtrack, dark, atmospheric, and fitting to the movie. Michael Kamen does a great job, but they couldn't leave it there. They brought in Orbital, a techno outfit, to collaborate with Kamen. Whilst not producing a masterpiece in any way, what they made is semi-original dark techno movie music that is quite fitting to the overall theme and atmosphere. The only downfall being that the songs don't move fast enough or seemingly go anywhere. It feels like 10 minutes of development with no payoff when compared to today's formulaic masterpieces of the same genre. Of course, this is not the case when Kamen is writing on his own in a more traditional film format. The soundtrack is not the first thing people think of when referencing or reviewing this film, but it should be included, and some may find it to be a masterpiece of genre inclusion. Whilst I would argue, if you want horror techno EDM style music, the darker synthwave artists of today are simply better, benefiting from time, influence, quite possibly influence directly from this soundtrack, and of course much better technology. Another honorable mention is the cast. Jason Isaacs from the OA comes to mind. Without any further ado, at number 1, we have grandiose scope achieved. Everything is attempted on a grandiose scale. Set design, music, imagery, acting, special effects and gore, almost all of it pulled off with an exception rarely seen in the genre, and indeed rarely seen in most genres, with the exception of some of the more over-the-top acting near the end, and some of the action being perhaps unneeded, as well as some of the character deaths being less developed character-wise than intended. Everything is pulled off with an execution that demands respect and admiration. And over time, that is exactly what this movie has gained, growing ever larger with a cult following that understands and appreciates the grand detail given to every dark and cryptic-filled corner. To say I recommend this movie is an understatement. If you are a fan of the genre, it is a required film. For anyone else, I would give a definitive gore warning. Some of the imagery is downright brutal and over the top, perhaps far too much for the average moviegoer. Although much of the gore is fast and hard to make out, what you do make out will stick with you, and you may well not want such an image floating around in your head. In my opinion, this is one of the best, if not the best horror movie of the 90s, and perhaps one of the best horror movies of all time. And it is most definitely the scariest space horror movie ever made. People can cry about Alien and other groundbreaking genre masterpieces, and they would have a great argument, but they are simply not as scary as Event Horizon. Nothing is as scary as Eternal Damnation. And by extension, in art, nothing is as scary as Eternal Damnation done right. And that is what Event Horizon is, an Eternal Damnation tale done right, with great acting, amazing ideas, and genius imagery. If you ever have the chance, do yourself a favor and give this one a shot. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Please hit the like and subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss out on any reviews in the future, and I will be back with more.